Welcome back to another video from Bike Fitness Coaching. Over the last month or so, I've listened to a few videos which discussed wives' tales we were told as bike fitters. We are going to talk about 9 of them. The first one, cops, will be in a separate video. It's going to be quite extensive. The issue is people say that there's no biomechanical evidence for cops to support cops. Au contraire, I have scientific studies we can discuss. We're going to discuss knee extension angles. Another one is women's sit bones are the same as men. We'll discuss that in detail. Short cranks are always better. Saddle sores are caused by bad hygiene. Too wide of a saddle causes cyclists to sit more forward. Hip rocking always means your saddle is too high. Millimeters don't maketh a difference. And height of a rider's inseam length equals a certain size of bike. Knee extension angles. We'll discuss the center of the knee, the correct long arm goniometer, 135, is that too low or is 150 too high? Determine correct crank length, install the correct cranks, then determine the saddle height. The first problem, as we can be seen here, is that many fitters don't know where the center of the knee is. Without knowing where the main pivot point of the knee is, how can you expect to get a realistic, i.e. correct knee extension and knee flexion angles? The problem persists with fitting systems like Retool and Purely Custom, where the fitter needs to know where to place the dots. I picked 4 random pictures off the internet. These red circles with the yellow plus sign are where the center of the knee actually is, and look at where fitters are actually fitting to. It's some 3.5 inches off, maybe 3 inches off, a couple inches off here, maybe 3.5 inches off here. You have to get this right first before you can really determine the correct knee extension angles. Point 2, most cyclists that come in for a bike fit are too low in the saddle. A saddle that is too low comes at a price, i.e. reduced power and reduced efficiency. Of course, the correct answer is to start with and get the client on the correct crank lengths. When we're done with a bike fit, most of our clients are in the 143 to 146 degree max extension with open, i.e. safe, knee and hip angles. Women's sit bone widths are the same as men. So let's discuss this wives' tale. Sit bone width, ischial tuberosity width. There's also the pubic rami that plays an important role in supporting the rider. Firstly, we measure the sit bone width of every client. This is written down on a fitting data sheet and given to the client as part of the post-fit discussion and recommendation. It is a fact that most bikes come with saddles that are too narrow, stems that are too long, and cranks that are too long. We discuss this at length in our bike fitting education classes. If the cyclist is on a too narrow of a saddle, they will tend to fall off from side to side as they pedal. We have a selection of saddles showing this fact. The leather is worn on the saddle and is actually worn off on the rear edge of the saddle, and the client usually complains about chafing and quickly worn out shorts, where the shorts rub on the saddle. Also, a lot of cyclists sit on their bicycle saddle with their lower back in the vertical position. Very few cyclists ride with an anterior rotated pelvis, which adds some pressure on the pubic rami, but more importantly engages the glutes. The fitter needs to start with the right saddle width so the cyclist is not falling off each side of the saddle while they're pedaling. We had the best luck pointing the client to a 155 millimeter specialized power saddle for men and a 155 millimeter wide specialized power mimic saddle for women. We are not sponsored by Specialized, but we found that these are the best saddles for most riders. Another trick is to have 3 slightly different saddles so that when you start feeling a saddle sore coming on, just switch to a different saddle so your pelvis interacts with the new saddle differently. A saddle sore will usually go away. We'll discuss that in another upcoming slide. In our experience, most men and women actually do need a 155. But let's discuss the fact that in general, women's pelvises and sit bones are actually wider than men's. In 2012, the U.S. Army conducted comprehensive anthropometric surveys to inform equipment and clothing design, including detailed measurements of pelvic and hip dimensions. The most recent large-scale study is the 2012 Army study, where they had 4,082 male and 1,986 female soldiers from active duty, reserves, and National Guard components. This survey provides direct measurements of various body dimensions, including those relevant to pelvic width. Key pelvic and hip-related measurements from the study, all in centimeters, show differences between men and women, often reflecting broader hips in women due to factors like soft tissue and skeletal structures adapted for childbirth. Here's a breakdown of the relevant metrics. 4,000, the hip breadth standing, or the hip breadth sitting, males were 34.57, females 35.38. So that's roughly, let's say, 1 centimeter wider on average. In this study where they were sitting, they were about 2 centimeters wider than men. And again, you are sitting on a saddle riding a bicycle. For context, an earlier U.S. Army survey from 1988, where they surveyed 1,774 men and 2,208 women, showed similar patterns but the slightly smaller overall dimensions, reflecting secular trends in body size over time, i.e. 1988 to 2012 is 24 years. Bodies have changed what the Army has seen in 24 years. These military surveys are among the most detailed U.S. government-funded data sets on this topic, as civilian studies from the National Health and Nutrition Examination surveys often focus on general health metrics rather than precise comparisons of pelvic width. Another study in 2021 by Yi-Lang Chen, entitled Change in External, or EITW, at Varying Trunk Thigh Angles Between the Sexes, measured 90 participants, 45 male and 45 female. The conclusion, the EITW was approximately 13 millimeters larger for women than men. And this has been our experience as well as fitters. In this study, they quote, "As a matter of fact, a pelvic anatomical difference exists. It does exist between males and females, such as a greater width between the ischial tuberosities in females. And this different pelvic geometry can lead to a saddle pressure distribution according to sex. And in line with the existing literature, we found a significant difference in the ischial distance between male and female cyclists due to the wider pelvic width of women. They tended to ride further back on the saddles than men." So in conclusion, I've referenced several studies that do show that women's sit bone widths are actually wider than men's, depending on which study you look at, between 1.3 centimeters and 2 centimeters wider. Short cranks are always better. The operative word is always. We use the word usually better. I'm 6 foot tall, and if you want to use me as an example, I used to race at 23 years old on 175 millimeter cranks. I got a lot of knee pain that first year. I went down to 172.5 cranks like everybody did back then, and that didn't really make much difference. I went right to 170s, which were at the time hard to find. And for the past 4 years, I've been using 165 cranks. So basically, I've talked with and researched a lot of papers. We have a family friend that's a retired orthopedic surgeon, and we spent a lot of discussions on how the knee works, what actually damages the knee. And yes, it's the 12 o'clock position, the shear and compressive forces on the knee at 12 o'clock due to over flexation of the joint. So basically, a too long of a crank, you can fit the person on any length crank at 6 o'clock, but what do you do to correct them at the 12 o'clock position? The only solution is a shorter crank. For most cyclists, too long of a crank will produce too high of shear and compressive forces on the knees. Hundreds of studies support this, thereby abrading away the knee's delicate articular cartilage, eventually causing destructive bone-on-bone wear. So for most of us, a shorter crank means a longer lasting and more enjoyable cycling experience. Another wives' tale, saddle sores are caused by bad hygiene. Agreed, this could be one of the factors, but since most cyclists are pretty hygienic, this should not be the major problem. In our experience, since one's sit bones are not symmetrical left to right, therefore any asymmetric interaction with the saddle will cause more pressure and abrasion on one side than the other. A simple way to fix this, and a trick, is to invest in several high-quality saddles that are slightly different. Male cyclists, as an example, can use a specialized 155 Power Pro with mirror. Also get a Selle Italia 155 Max SLR Boost TI 316 Gel Superflow. That's a mouthful. Or sell a SMP VT30C Gel in 155 millimeter. When you feel a saddle sore coming on, change out the saddle and rotate the saddle periodically. And one more note, if you find a saddle that you really like, then buy 2 or 3 of them, because if you wait, the manufacturer will inevitably change the design for the worse. Too wide of a saddle causes the cyclist to sit more forward, probably one of the biggest wives' tales out there. The argument, World Tour Pro cyclists are on extremely narrow saddles and gravitate towards the nose of the saddle anyway. No thigh clearance issue here, so why is this? Well, let's look into it in detail, but hint or spoiler, the stem is usually too long for them, pulling them too far out of position. You'll see this in the following slides. And if you look at this latest GCN video, I'll take the tip of his helmet and see where he's located in relationship to the handlebar. As they rotate forward, which a lot of the World Tour pros like to do, tip of his helmet, he's this much more, maybe a whole hand width further forward than sitting more upright. Closing this distance so he feels comfortable on the handlebars, he will tend to slide forward. That's the main cause. Here's another little example. This is where he's sitting in the more upright position. And as they get into the arrow position, he's sitting much more forward. And if you look at it closely, he's sitting more forward on the saddle. It's not the saddle, it's the position he's in and the length of the stem, which we'll see next slide. Here we go. Here's a World Tour Pro in this forward position. This is the back of the saddle, and this is where he's sitting. Guarantee it's not the width of the saddle that's causing him to sit too far forward. So let's look at Remco. I've reversed this so we can look at the same, they're facing the same direction, but here he's sitting in a more upright position. And look where he's sitting, right at the back of the saddle. As soon as he leans forward, look at Remco where he's sitting. Again, he's sitting on the correct width saddle and he's sitting comfortably. It's not the width of the saddle that's causing him to sit too far forward. Notice the length of the stem. This could be one of the causes for it. Hip rocking equals your saddle is too high. Yes. While excessive height can cause rocking, it can also be the result from A, a saddle that is too low, B, poor core stability and strength, C, tight hip flexors, D, wrong saddle width, E, foot, cleat, pedal instability issues, F, excessive reach, G, saddle too far back, H, leg length discrepancy, I, can even be the cyclist's natural movement. By assuming it's always too high, leads fitters to drop the saddles unnecessarily, thereby reducing the rider's power and efficiency. Another wives' tale, millimeters don't maketh a difference. Yes, millimeters actually do make us a difference. A bike fitter should initially fit the client within their safe joint angle ranges. This usually refers to saddle height. Once the high-low range is determined, then the fitter can adjust slightly up or down, forward or backward, and the client will tell you that's the spot. An example, we have fit many cyclists where we initially place a saddle in its middle position. Most clients will say it feels better than before because they come in too low. Next, we start bumping up the saddle a millimeter at a time until they say perfect. To test this theory, we bump up the saddle another millimeter and they say, what did you do? The fit feels horrible now. We bump it back down a millimeter and they say again, perfect. Leave it right there. So yes, millimeters do actually make a difference. Height of a rider's inseam length equals a certain size of a bike. For bike sizing, and I guess that's what we're talking about here, a great place to start is by referring to the manufacturer's frame geometry and sizing charts and entering these measurements and angles into your size cycle. Now you will have the basic measurements of the new bicycle frame and then can add the components that will come with the bike. The components and their sizes should also be listed on the manufacturer's website under components. Recently, this is not the case. The manufacturers are trying to hide a lot of that information from the public. You will size the stem, add the crank lengths, add the saddle and handlebars, and you'll be able to see if the new bicycle frame will fit the client. From here, it is easy to spend a little more time and complete an actual full bike fit. Based on this new bike fit, list down the measurements and component changes needed, give the results to the client, and they can confidently order the new right size bicycle with the right components. The mechanic can do a build with the appropriate components. At this point, the client could come back to the fitter for a final fine tuning. So again, we're talking about bike sizing. And yes, inseam is a good place to start, but you might have to go up or down depending on torso length to leg length and vice versa. So hopefully these few slides will help confirm or debunk some of the wives' tales that we have all heard.